The bell tower at Cambridge University's King's College is one of the most iconic landmarks in England. Built in the late 1400s, its ringing echoed across the rooftops for hundreds of years. That is until 1942, when a shell struck the tower, smashing its bells into smithereens. It sat silent for over 60 years. But then in 2007, restoration work finally got underway. That's when Sarah, one of the construction workers, heard a regular tapping coming from inside the tower. She reported her eerie discovery to her boss, David. He didn't believe her. The scaffolding was making plenty of noise, and there were dozens of workers climbing around up there. So he figured it was just some loose board or something. But then others started hearing it too. Not a hammer on metal, but the distinct sound of someone tapping with a wooden mallet. As soon as they stopped working, the tapping stopped. Then they'd start again, and the tapping would begin anew. There was only one problem. No one was up there. David and his team checked every inch of the scaffolding, but they found nothing. They climbed to the very top, peered between the planks, and shone flashlights through every crack. But there was nothing but empty air. There was no one up there making the sound. In the end, they had to abandon the project for the day. But the next morning, the bell tower was eerily silent. No matter how hard they tried, they could not get the ghost to make a sound while they were there. As far as Sarah and David are concerned, the ghost was only ever heard from inside the bell tower. And since that part of the building hadn't been opened in decades, whatever was haunting the tower stayed quiet once the place was open again. But this isn't the only time strange things have happened at Cambridge. In fact, most universities have their fair share of ghosts. Just ask Emmanuel College's caretaker, Christopher. He's responsible for looking after the grounds and buildings of the college, which was founded in 1584. But as you can imagine, a job like that comes with its perks. After hours, Chris sometimes stays behind to get a head start on the next day, or to finish off a project. Most of the time, he works alone, which is why he jumped when he heard someone else shuffling around. He turned slowly, expecting to see a student, or maybe a fellow caretaker. But he found nothing. At first, he thought it was just his imagination. That is, until he heard footsteps near the cloisters. Footsteps he knew all too well. It was the sound of someone walking in sandals, and he had only ever heard them twice before, both times being shown around the college by one of the caretakers. When he looked around, he saw nobody, not even a cat. He went back to work though, because as Chris says, you can't let these things beat you. You just get on with the job. But even he couldn't explain away the next story. Students had been complaining about the porter's lodge being cold. So Chris decided to turn up the thermostat. He set it to about 25 degrees Celsius, then waited for the room to warm up. But after half an hour, it was still freezing. He fiddled with the controls, trying to figure out what was wrong. Was the heating broken? Had someone changed the thermostat settings? He had no idea. But as he searched for answers, he noticed a window open in the draft. It wasn't much of a surprise. Some students must have forgotten to close it. But when he shut the window, something unbelievable happened. The room suddenly became stuffy and hot, like the radiator had been blasting the whole time. That's when he heard the sound of footsteps, slow and measured, pacing back and forth. But there was no one in the room. He could feel the heat rising from the floorboards beneath him, and the air grew thick and stagnant. When he opened the window again, the heat lifted, and the footsteps faded away. It was like the spirit of the porter's lodge itself was keeping the warmth inside for someone. Chris isn't sure if there's a ghost haunting the lodge, but he knows one thing: whoever it is, they like it hot. And he's not the only one who's experienced strange temperatures. Take Michael, for instance, the former vicar of St. Mary's Church in Bury St. Edmunds. The church is one of the largest in Suffolk and dates back to the 15th century. It was also the final resting place for Mary Tudor's half-sister, Princess Elizabeth, who died within its walls in 1558. Some say her ghost still walks the nave, searching for her lost crown. But that's not the reason Michael had a ghost thermometer. One particularly chilly winter's day, he was conducting a funeral in the church when the temperature plummeted dramatically. The mourners huddled closer together for warmth. But when he finished the service and everyone had left, he decided to stay behind. He wanted to see if the church was as cold as people said it was. But instead of finding a freezing mausoleum, he found a sweltering sauna. The air was thick and heavy. His glasses steamed up and he could barely breathe. In fact, he almost fainted. That's when he discovered his thermometer, which had been reading 43 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's not the only time people have felt the heat at St. Mary's. One day, Michael was working in his office when he heard the clatter of chains dragging themselves across the stone floor. The chains were attached to one of the church's mummies, which was on display at the time. But he dismissed the sound, assuming some school children were running around playing. After all, it was summer holiday. When he walked past the mummy case, though, he found it wide open. At first, he thought the chains had simply fallen off, but then he saw them. The chains had been dragged all the way across the church. They were cold to the touch, but the room around them was unnaturally warm. Then he felt something brush against his leg, and when he looked down, he saw nothing. That's when he knew the spirit of St. Mary's was stirring. For centuries, the church was known as the Lady Chapel, and legend has it that Mary Tudor used to visit her sister's tomb and weep. Maybe the ghost of Princess Elizabeth still walks these halls, or perhaps it's the ghost of Mary, forever mourning her sibling. But whatever it is, it likes to keep its home nice and toasty. We've traveled all over England to find these ghostly tales, but our journey takes us abroad for our next story. Because sometimes the dead refuse to rest, no matter where they are. Take Jack, for example. In May 2008, he was traveling with his girlfriend in India when they decided to explore the abandoned city of Pangar Fort. It was once a thriving settlement, but now it's a crumbling ruin, supposedly haunted by the ghost of a princess. Legend says the king ordered her put to death for breaking a taboo, but that hasn't stopped people entering the fort since. In fact, it's become something of a tourist attraction. But as soon as the sun sets, visitors aren't allowed inside. That's because the Archaeological Survey of India believes the fort is cursed. No one's sure exactly what happened, but paranormal investigators have reported objects moving by themselves, unexplainable noises and shadowy figures lurking in the corner of their eyes. And many believe the ghost of the princess still haunts the fort, killing anyone who enters after dark. Jack didn't believe any of that nonsense. Ghosts weren't real. It was all made up to scare tourists into spending more money. So he ignored the warnings and snuck inside after sunset. But within minutes, he wished he'd listened to the experts. He could feel eyes burning into his neck. Every time he turned around, there was nothing there. Then he heard a loud crash. Something heavy had fallen from above. He ran, stumbling over rocks and tripping on roots, desperately trying to find the exit. But the trees seemed to close in around him. He couldn't remember entering, so how could he get out? He broke into a sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs. Then he saw it. A faint light appeared in front of him, beckoning him forward. He scrambled toward it, desperate to escape the fort. But just as he reached the opening, the light flickered and disappeared. He was trapped. Then he heard a voice whispering his name, growing louder and more insistent. He turned, expecting to see the ghost of the princess, but there was no one there. Jack didn't stick around to find out if the curse was real. He practically flew out of the fort, racing to safety. As far as he's concerned, the ghost of Pangar Fort is very real, and he never wants to go back. Now it's time to make your voice heard. Which of these ghostly locations would you want to explore? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Ghostly History Official, because next we uncover even more hidden tales the world was never meant to hear.